TV.
All right, let's get to the big story. Of course, one of the biggest happenings today is Tarehe Sita celebrations that are happening in Butaleja. At some point, I'll be linking to my colleague, Habad Ziwa, who is in Butaleja, so that we follow what's happening there. But away from that, there's a lot that's happening in the education sphere, if you want to call it that. Schools have resumed, at least as of yesterday, majority of them, some last week, but majority yesterday. And a couple of issues are sticking out. The Minister of Education is saying there are basic minimum standards which schools must meet. And they're saying a plethora of schools, about 300 of them, do not meet these standards. And the ministry is saying, we are not going to allow you to operate. And these schools are saying, we try and meet something, you know, allow us to operate as we eventually meet all that's required. Other people are saying, but wait a minute, what's good for the goose should be good for the gander. So if there are private schools that don't meet minimum standards, close them. But if there are UPE schools as well, which by the way are very many, that don't meet standards, can you close them too? So there's pettifogging over that. We'll see how things go. But let me get to my guests. We have Patrick Kaboyo. He's the National Secretary, Federation of Non-State Education Institutions. That's a complicated way of saying these are the guys that own private schools, I want to believe. And so you have an association, right?
It is a federation.
Federation, whatever you want to call it.
Umbrella.
An umbrella. Okay, good morning. How are you?
Fine, thank you, Joel. Good morning, viewers. How are you, Joel?
I'm very well. We're also joined by James Twaheyo. James Twaheyo used to be Secretary General?
General
Secretary of UNATU, that's Uganda National Teachers Union.
Yeah.
He stepped down after his term expired. I was teasing him and saying he's not serious. They should have removed all those limits, I don't know what, and he keeps around. Good morning. What are you up to now that you left UNATU?
Good morning, viewers. Right now, I am with some few other teachers. We are establishing the teachers' insurance, which I am directing. And I think very soon we shall be inviting you and many others to the launching of the teachers' insurance.
What's teachers' insurance? Is that a school? Is
No. It is an institution, it's a welfare institution that is going to take responsibility of the teachers' ailments, teachers' health, teachers' loans, all those other issues that affect the social, economic welfare of the teachers.
Okay. Patrick, let me start with you. I know that many of the schools, if not all, probably fall under your federation. Those which government is saying, Minister of Education for that matter, you don't meet the minimum standards, so we are going to close you. The biggest victim would be Bridge International Schools because they have 63 schools and they have had run-ins with government. But you are saying, and you quoted in today's Daily Monitor, you want the standards in place, but you have certain issues of concern. What are those issues of concern?
Thank you, Joel and viewers. I want to state by correcting you a bit. A federation is bigger than an association. That association is affiliate to the federation, which is a fact. And right from ECD, or call them nursery schools, universities that are privately owned, makes the composition of the federation leadership.
So let me be sure we're on the same page. Your federation has private schools that run from kindergarten, primary, secondary.
All education institutions.
But no, it's just semantics, because federation association, English-wise, is an English teacher. I don't know if you're still teaching.
Yeah, I'm a teacher of English.
You teach, you're a teacher of English.
Yeah.
There you are, and now you're on point. Now you're a real teacher. But anyway, so talk to us about the concerns that you have.
Let me talk to you that yesterday we had a press conference which we addressed, and we had some few issues that are of importance to put to the sector. The first was that we realized there is a challenge in terms of people accessing their licenses, and this also comes in as a result of the delays that are systemic, sometimes not by the structure that defines them, but because of people's behavior, way of work, attitude, and culture. So we made a demand yesterday that the licensing process should be a bit relaxed and not so bureaucratic, and there should be improved communication in terms of back and forth feedback.
When you say relaxed, Patrick, are these not the challenges that we have had with the education system? That people take, well, not just the education system, you know, systems generally in this country, that we relax about everything, and that means nothing gets to work because the whip is not being cracked. And you guys are saying, don't crack the whip. Let's remain with our not very good standards and we'll see how things go.
You see, when I say relax, you take it in a negative attitude. When I say relax, it means that both sides should be able to dialogue and have that bureaucratic line cut. When I say relax, it means that we leave the other colonial mentality of administering with a red line, and we involve a one-on-one discussion, and we inspire each other to know where we are going, because regulation and standardization and compliance is not an event. It is a process. It's not true that all the requirements that a school should have in place can be put in place at a go. Some should be phased. Some should come at a time, but not say, if I come to your school and I don't find ABCD, you are a candidate for closure. And also for appreciative inquiry. Closure has never been a solution to any intervention.
But wait a minute. Wait a minute. Now,
Is interrupting.
yeah.
That's okay. He can come in.
I would like to come in.
Thoughts with us. Do you
I'd
think
like to
Ahmed is
come
being
in.
too hard on them?
Now, let's look at things objectively. You cannot have your cake and at the same time eat it. We want standards. We want our children to have the best. We want education to reflect the real picture of what this country would like to have. And if we don't stick to that, we shall lose out. We shall certainly lose out. It is good to support the people who are investing in education, but we must also support them without necessarily relaxing or forgetting the purpose for which education is meant. We must build up skills. We must get the learners to achieve what they want. We must ensure that the parents who are putting their money to these institutions get the worth for their money. So if the government doesn't do that, then the government would be failing in its duty, and I think it would be unfair to force the government to fold its arms unless things fall, unless things go, and at the end of the day, we start blaming the government. In my view, the government should do its duty. The government should do its duty looking both at its own institutions, but also at the private institutions. And that's where the challenge comes in. Quite often people raise arguments and say, look, some government schools are in very poor shape, worse than some of the private schools they are saying should be closed. Why then should the other schools be closed and these left out? My view is, if the standards of that school is poor, whether government or private, it is poor, period. And the government should take the whip and crack off all those. And that is where we should look at these issues objectively and sincerely, but in the best interest of the children who are going to these institutions.
So Patrick, there you are. He, like several other people, are saying our children should learn. You know, we don't want our children to study in tenement structures. The tenement structure is one that's about to fall on young people. You know, hygiene and all these different things, curriculum are looked into. And you guys are saying government relax a little bit. We want, I don't know how much time to sort out these things, because the Minister of Education is saying they have had engagements with some of you for donkey's years. You have not taken action on the things they've asked you to take action on, and you're saying we need more time. And at the end of the day, who is the sufferer? It is the pupil, the student.
Thank you, Joel. We just don't need more time for the sake of it. We need time that has timelines. We need to commit and have a deadline. To have
They give you deadlines, which pass? That's why they're saying we are cracking the whip now. We're not allowing you to open.
Viewers out there can be witness to this show to state when those deadlines were given to them in writing. And you know, I also know for a fact that you're a student of law. We have what we call fair hearing. So for you to really, closure should be the last resort or a punitive measure. And if you own a school and they come to close your school, Joel, I don't know what your emotions and your locus would be at that point in time. Remember, a school is not a glossary or a law firm, but a school has young people, those are children, has parents, has teachers, has working staff that is both teaching and non-teaching. They are not of the same profession. Like you might have only lawyers in your chamber, for instance. So for you to be able to handle people's mental faculties and create a good situation in the community where that school is, for your information, the school's purpose is to serve the community first. That's why these schools have missions, visions, objectives, and most schools are filled by members of those communities. So for you to close, you should put the interests of the community.
Let me be sure we're on the same page, Patrick. Are you saying that these schools have never gotten word from the Ministry of Education, that the first word has been this particular time that we are closing you? They've never gotten a warning. Is that what you're saying?
Let me give
because the basic minimum standards are available, you people know them. So for you to say, we know the minimum standards, we shall flout them, and when you come to close us, an example, Bridge, for example, we have been, following up this story for donkey's years, and we have seen correspondences between them and the Ministry of Education. So when you say there has not been any communication at all, I don't quite understand.
I have said communication should be periodic and phased. And by the time you get to closure, that means you have exhausted all the other avenues, which is the last resort. We do not refuse to comply because we are law-abiding directors of schools, and compliance is inevitable. But what we are saying is that the process of closure should not be managed in a punitive manner, should be a process that if I really do not comply, and we have had a number of times of engagement, both in writing and both face-to-face, then I will have no case. But also this issue of closure brings in another element of the efficiency and effectiveness in the licensing process. There are some directors who stated that the process is quite cumbersome, is quite tiresome, takes a lot of time. But also you find that the Ministry of Education officers are saying that there are some directors who do not heed to the requests in time. So the demand we made yesterday is that to have a smooth running of that office by having key stakeholders brought to table to discuss. Or even we need to review that process, because since private schools were started in this country, we have not had a robust review of how licensing has been taking place.
Yes, James, you wanted to come in.
Now, let's not look at the tail end of the process, at the closure per se. Government, through the Ministry of Education, forwarded the warnings to all institutions in this country last year. You remember, the same uproar came up. It was somewhere in second term. The argument was that it is not fair to close the schools in the process of the year. And I agree with that argument. It is not fair to let me start and then say close when the children are there floating. In November last year, actually in October, on October 22nd, government released another circular to all institutions, and all institutions got it, informing them that, look, if you don't meet the minimum standards required, we shall not progress with you. The same government issued an additional circular on the 24th of November as schools were coming to the close, by the permanent secretary signed. Forget about Bridge as an individual institution or private institutions. They got these letters, but even the government institutions got. Now, let's look at the process also through which these schools come up. All schools get letters to enable them and allow them to start, and they are given the minimum requirements which they should progressively build up. I don't believe that an inspector will come to a school and say, we are closing you today, when the same inspector is the one who gave you the authority to start, but with the progressive requirements which you would expect over time. By the way, some of these schools have not lived for a year, for 2, for 3. Some have lived for 5, for 10 years. So if they say you need to have a list of registered teachers and you don't have them 1 year, 2 years. If they say if you are working in premises, have the tenancy agreement. If they say you should have the facilities for sanitation. If they say you should have the facilities for children's play. Because, by the way, we should look at the skills we build in these learners. And they give you the time. And you can't meet the time 1 year, 2 years. And the government folds its arms and lets things go. Sincerely, these officers in government would not be serious. Let's look at it also from this perspective. Do we have any schools which made their submissions to the ministry last year and these schools never got a response? Do we have the schools which were given the requirements and they have started working on them and they have something to show? They say, okay, you said we needed these 5 items. So far we have progressively moved. Even we have made 2 or 3 or even 1 and these schools are closed. I would take the ministry and serious. I would take the officers in the ministry, the irresponsible persons, if they didn't do their duty and fail to get this done. Yes, there is an argument by some private school providers that when they go to the ministry, they don't make any response. But ordinarily, anybody who corresponds must have a response. If I send you a letter, I should ensure that this letter is received, and I would refer to this letter and say, look, I sent this request, you never responded to it, or I sent this request 5 months ago, I have not had any response, and I have not even had any inspector coming there. So this is where we should look at things, and we don't simply say the schools should not be closed. And by the way, we are talking of unregistered schools. If you have a shop, and remember, private education is a business. By the way, nobody should deceive you that they are not doing it for profit. They are.
Of course, I mean, that's why they ask for all manner of requirements.
They are doing it for profit.
Barbed wire,
so if you are saying that in Uganda, business should be done without regulation. If you are saying I should go to Chikubo, open a shop, I don't get a license, and I operate, then we are saying that everything should be done freely without any regulation, and then we shall have challenges. Okay, why are you regulated as television?
Patrick, as you come in, you see the challenge that has been with this country is many times we want to operate in a laissez-faire atmosphere. We are very poor at deadlines. SIM card registration, you know, be it, you know, national card and all these different things. We want extensions and extensions, and even when you extend, there are people who will wait for last minute and they don't do these things, you know. And we're having a resemblance situation here, because you say you've not gotten communication from the ministry. No. Turns out that's not true.
Let's first
so for how long do you want this to happen? Because they're saying, look, work on your hygiene, all these different things, then get registered and you roll out.
Let's add some statistics in this discussion and not just have it blanketly information and discussion. I want to state that it's not a fact that all schools are businesses. Maybe James should know that some schools are community schools to address a social challenge, and profit is not anywhere in the running of such schools. 2, there are some schools that have a mix for profit and no profit, and there are schools that could be making profits. So making a statement on a national TV that all schools are profit, James, I think that is
private
right.
Investors
Let me
investing
first
for profit.
Wait,
let's have that clear.
Wait a bit. Not all private. Some are watching us, some are listening, and it's not true. Another fact is that in the recently released PLE results, UPE schools, which my brother James has been presiding over for quite a number of years, registered.
I have not presided over them, I have represented them.
You have represented them, the same statement holds. Posted 11% total failure. Well, those in private posted 4.4% failure. Now, you have to see that and rate it to the realities of the time. A third fact I want to give you, is that the manpower survey done by the government of Uganda, UBOS, states that the private investors in education employ to 66.5%, while the public sector employs 33.5%. That is by a half. So when you are discussing issues regulation, I don't want you to look at it as a pedestrian talk, but I want you to look at it as a matter of investment.
So because it's investment, there should be no regulation?
No, listen, I'm coming. Any investment must have regulation. And as a federation, we are good and we say we need compliance. And that's
You're saying you're good?
We are good.
But the Minister of Education is saying here are the minimum standards, you know them, you have not met them. So if you're saying you're good, why are you asking for more time? Because the reason you're asking for more time is because you're not good, you want to be good.
A few directors have not met the standards. I agree to that. But if those have not met the standards, you do not come to close them to enforce. Because when you close, you kill. You don't help to grow. And what we are saying is that going forward, both the public and private sector are going to have a joint monitoring and support supervision mechanism that puts clearly what the situation is. Because when we have this discussion tilted to only private schools as if they are the ones wanting, we forget the other side of the picture that also needs to be handled wholesomely to help this country, but not to have the target focusing on private schools. And
okay, let me actually put...
Final on this, we are open to compliance, we are open to dialogue, and we are saying that every director who has fallen short of the required standards should put things right. And closure will not help, but continuous engagement.
James, the UPE schools that you say you have represented, sometimes you look at the UPE schools and you're wondering whether this is a cattle kraal or a school.
Yes.
For pupils or for students for that matter. And some of us are saying what's good for the goods should be good for the gander.
Joel,
for me, I'm actually for if a school is not meeting standards,
absolutely
close it.
Joel,
private or UPE. But we seem to see the whip cracked the other side only, and there's little being done about the UPE ones.
We should not deny that. There are a number of schools in this country that don't meet the standards. And it is very clear. And our argument should not be that we should keep a closed eye over them. We should look at these schools and enforce standards. That should be our principle, number one. Number two, I'm glad my brother here is raising the issue of statistics. But we should not simply look at statistics, sometimes which are lopsided, and we imagine that since we have these statistics, say 66% of the teachers are engaged in the private sector, and we forget that there are also other issues that we must look at this 66%. First of all, the standards they are talking about is that even this 66% of the teachers in private schools, they should have regulations to enforce, to say, for example, that all these teachers should have contracts. So if we simply say, do we want to say, my brother here, that all the 66% teachers in the private institutions have contracts? The government is saying the standard should be, let that 66, even if it was 100%, let them have contracts. And by the way, let's not look at only those in private schools. Even those in the government schools, are they formally employed? Are they given their appointments? Are they confirmed? So let's not look at it to say, let's protect this side and forget the other side. Every worker, whether in private or in government, should have the contract which should be enforceable at the end of the day to protect him. Secondly, when we are looking at other issues of the 66%, we are forgetting, by the way, that even at secondary and university level, that 66% could be doubling in both private and the government. And that's the reality. Anybody watching this show will tell you,
nope.
Anybody in this show will tell you that we can have a Patrick or James teaching in a government secondary school and doubling and teaching in a private school. Deny it or not, it is a fact. Everybody knows it. It is written on the wall.
Well, the president actually allowed them to moonlight because they were saying we're not getting paid a lot.
Because they're getting benefits
my time is running fast.
Look at this. There are a number of teachers, head teachers who own schools, who are working with the government and their schools are competing with the government schools, and they are using the government resources, and they themselves, their government resources, and they are using themselves to work and put additional attention in the schools where they teach. Let him deny it. There are a number of head teachers at primary, a number of teachers at primary who own primary schools, which are competing with their own schools, and therefore they put more attention there. There are a number of secondary school head teachers who will even admit, the very same person, single person, admitting for this government, admitting for the other government, and using the same resources. Science, materials, all those are there. Now, let me not digress to that, but let's look at the standards required. What are these standards we're talking about? Patrick, not every private school has failed to meet standards. There are very many good citizens who are managing or own private schools and have really met the standards. Do you think those people have done wrong? There are also those who have failed or deliberately refused to adhere to the ministry's calling of having the right standards in place. The Ministry of Education should be held accountable for the failure of the standards, whether at private or at government.
All right, granted. Let's talk about something else, and we need to begin to wrap this up. Patrick, of course, there are concerns about the standards, rightly so, but then parents are also concerned about how private schools are trying to squeeze literally everything out of them. Tuition, for example, and government was saying, look, before you increase, can we engage? You guys have defied requirements. You know, you're telling students come with all these different things, cement, barbed wire, I don't know what, and so on. Why? You're making it difficult for learners to study because parents cannot afford these things.
What you are discussing is a matter of education financing. And when we come to education financing, it goes beyond the fees you are seeing. It goes to both software and hardware components of a school. If you want to follow this through, I want to invite you to go to the Office of the Auditor General and look for a report they did on the costing of university education, what a student should be paying at a university.
You're not running universities, you're running primary and secondary schools.
I'm giving you a rider so that you get to know. I would also want to tell you that there are public schools that charge relatively higher than private schools. But that said, in October last year, the cost of a kilogram of beans or posho, even the cost of a liter of fuel, was not at the same rate as it is now. Where do you expect the director to get resources to run this school? Most times, resources are not put up to exorbitant rates so that these parents are squeezed. It's not that way. Most times, the costs that give us the fees we pay resonate with the market prices, but also resonate with the quality of education they are offering. And any viewer who is listening to us, who wishes to think that quality education comes with no cost, then
the cost should be fair.
The cost is fair, of course. I have not seen parents on the streets ranting, running around, camping at James Tweheyo's office that the costs are high. He also pays costs for his children. I do pay. Viewers pay. I know you also pay for your children or siblings. So the discussion we should have is to integrate this issue of education financing in the national, social, economic, and political aspects that we are facing. That
sounds very theoretical.
No, it's practical.
I hope eventually we can crack these things.
But
my time is up in 30 seconds.
My brother, unfortunately, is bringing the issue of education financing when earlier he had denied that these private institutions are not doing business. But anyway, that's for another day. That's for another day.
But we are hoping standards can be adhered to.
I want also to appreciate that these private providers are doing a good job. We should appreciate that. Although they should not forget that even when you're doing the best, you should do it in the right circumstances, right environment, and make sure that the people you're providing for get the best of what they offer in terms of payment.
Okay, that's a good way to end it. Gentlemen, thank you for talking to us.
Most welcome.
And that's it for the big story. We'll take a quick break. Coming up is Everyday Life.
You're watching Morning at